Hello, I'm Jared.
And I'm Ebony, and this is his.
And hers, Warhammer 40k. Yay.
Yay.
We don't have a book to talk about today. We've had some technical problems, we've
Yeah.
had some delays, we've been reading some other books. So, just to fill a slot, we figured we can talk about one of my favorite subjects in 40k, which is the Forgotten Corners of the Inquisition.
You're obsessed.
The Ordo Minoris, if you will.
You're
I'm not obsessed with it, but it's an area that I feel they did a very good job developing, but leaving enough holes for interesting theories.
I mean, I'm not an Inquisition hater. I think being Inquisitor is cool.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. This will mostly be me just kind of talking to Eb and getting her opinion on it, I suppose.
All right, let's go.
Okay, so to start, just some terminology. At the top, you have your Ordo. All right, Ordos, generally, people know
I know the
them
big ones.
You know the big ones. And in fact, I would expect anyone watching this video should already be familiar with the three major Ordos.
Xenos, Malleus, Hereticus.
Hereticus. Correct. However, what people don't often get right is that Ordos are not jurisdictions. Meaning just because you're an Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor doesn't mean you can't be investigating a Xenos incursion or a warp rift or something outside of that.
Oh, I feel like I did not know that.
Yeah. What an Ordo is just a statement that you believe a particular threat to the Imperium is the most dangerous threat, or is the one that you feel most capable of
Dealing with?
dealing with.
Okay.
Right. So it's basically just a grouping of Inquisitors who believe that one particular threat is the most dangerous and needs the priority.
So it's like you think Xenos are the major threat to humanity.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
So it's more of a philosophy of inquisitorial work than it is a limiter.
It's interesting that you say philosophy, because I'm going to say no right now and instead describe it more of like an interest.
Okay. Broad interest.
Because inquisitorial philosophies are actually a whole different subject matter,
Okay.
which I'll get into just a little bit later. So those are Ordos.
Okay.
Next, you have a conclave. So inquisitorial conclave is basically the gathering of all inquisitors in a geographic area.
Okay.
So it's usually across all three Ordos. It's designed to just kind of cover all major
How
threats
big?
within that area, depending on the sector. Like it was. Oh yeah. So it's
Was
usually
it
a
like
sector.
this sector of the universe?
Yes.
Okay.
So the most famous one in the Dark Heresy RPGs, there's the Calixian Conclave.
Okay.
Because it's the Calixis sector.
Okay.
Caligari's conclave for Caligari sector.
Okay.
Usually, if an inquisitor needs to be brought up on trial because they did something that that other inquisitors consider heretical,
Okay.
Or some other issue, it'll be brought before the conclave.
Okay. So it is like a little bit of a governing body of inquisitors in a certain area.
Right. Now that said, all inquisitors are equal.
Well, then how does a conclave punish you?
Influence and resources.
Okay.
So a conclave you'll often hear is led by an inquisitor lord.
Okay.
Ordos can also be led by inquisitor lords.
Okay.
But they're just titles of respect. They are just those who have the most influence and the
Okay.
most resources.
So not all inquisitors are referred to as Lord Inquisitor?
Well, by non-inquisitors.
Okay, so like
sure.
a layperson would be like,
In the
my
same-
Lord Inquisitor.
Yes.
Okay.
In the same way they'd refer to a space marine as my lord.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that was a specific title, right?
Yes.
Like Dame, or if it was like a sort of a genuflection to a superior.
Inquisitor Lord, Grand Master,
Okay.
all sorts of titles.
Okay.
But most of this is hierarchy that's developed for that specific conclave.
Okay, so it's specific to that community of inquisitors.
Correct.
Okay.
Conclaves, geographic
Okay.
denomination.
Okay.
Within conclaves, sometimes not, but most of the time within a conclave, you will have cabals.
Okay.
And a cabal is a group of inquisitors that are focused on one particular threat,
Okay.
usually within that geographic area.
Okay.
So a famous one, within the Calixis sector, you have something called the Tyrant Star.
Okay.
And it's kind of this stellar phenomenon that appears over planets and it drives people crazy and it causes uprisings.
Cool.
And like just turns the whole world upside down.
Got it.
And then disappears.
Okay.
And like weeks or months later could appear over a completely different planet. So you had something called the Tyrantine Cabal, which were the group of inquisitors trying to investigate what is the Tyra Star. It went by a bunch of other names, Comas,
Okay.
And that's like a mystery
Okay.
that they were trying to solve.
So less like a local jurisdiction, but more like an individual case, like a task force.
Yes, I would say that. Cabals often are like sort of limited to one ordo, but they can be across multiple.
Okay.
And then smaller than a cabal, you have a cell.
Okay.
And a cell is like a cabal focused on one particular problem, but is designed to be even more transitory.
Okay.
And it's usually for a very specific short-term problem.
But
that has to
multiple
be dealt with.
inquisitors.
Multiple inquisitors still.
Okay.
Yeah. More than multiple inquisitors, multiple inquisitor networks. Because every inquisitor is going to have their interrogator, their acolytes,
Right.
their eyes and ears, and all those sorts of people. Right.
The retinue.
The retinue, exactly. Yeah. So, when you had mentioned philosophies earlier, all the ordos, conclave, cabal, for the most part, are divided by the interest.
Okay.
The philosophy is the Puritan versus radical divide.
Okay.
So this is you have your threat that you believe is the most dangerous, but your philosophy is how you deal with it.
Okay.
So Puritan inquisitors would be ones like an Amalthean. An Amalthean inquisitor believes that the Imperium is fine the way it is,
Okay.
and it is their job to keep it that way.
Okay.
So Amaltheans are all about maintaining the status quo.
Okay. It's a very conservative inquisitor.
It is this what's sort of known as the safest.
Okay.
A random inquisitor is most likely to be an Amalthean.
Okay.
Okay. On a more extreme Puritan end, you have a monodominant.
Okay.
Monodominants believe psychers are an absolute and forever threat against humanity. All psychers must eventually be wiped out.
Including the emperor?
No one actually believes the emperor is a psycher. The emperor is a god.
Okay.
That's a whole different category.
Okay.
Which is brought up by the third major Puritan faction, the Thorians.
Okay.
So the Thorians are a very religious group. They still believe in sort of the state of the Imperium being mostly okay, but they believe Sebastian Thor, who we've talked about a bit in the past, was a true avatar of the God Emperor.
Okay.
That the God Emperor basically took a piece of himself, put it in a human body in order to interact with the world.
Okay.
And the Thorians believe that there are others like that out in the galaxy.
So that was Thorians.
Thorians.
And
So Amaltheans are the first group.
Okay.
Monodominants.
Okay.
And Thorians.
But Amaltheans isn't an overarching group. They're separate from. They're all Puritans.
They're philosophies. They're all Puritans. Yes.
Okay.
If you're an Amalthean, you're going to be a Puritan.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting is about all of these groups and all the radical ones, which we'll just talk about a smattering. There are many radical groups.
Okay.
Is when it comes to actual inquisitorial friendships, they're more likely to be by the philosophical denomination rather than by something like the Ordo or the Conclave.
Because you might all think that you might both think psychers are the greatest threat to the Imperium, so you might be more likely to work together, whether or not you are individually hunting heretics or Xenos. Got it.
Exactly. On the radical side, I should have gotten at least a full list. There are some very interesting ones.
Okay.
The Istvanians are maybe the most
As
famous.
in Istvan?
As in Istvan.
Okay.
They believe that the Istvan sort of massacre and everything that sort of followed with that was a positive for the Imperium. That you basically need to have this destructive force in order to enact the change needed to improve the Imperium.
Okay.
You need something destructive to rip away that which is bad.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, the Istvanians are, in general, it takes a... Radical inquisitors are still technically allowed within like conclaves and other groups.
Okay.
Until there's evidence against them.
That's see.
Usually what happens.
You can be a radical as long as no one catches you.
Right.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
Then you have even more extremes.
Okay.
So you have groups like the Xanthites. I don't know if you recall, this is going to be a spoiler for, well, the End and the Death Part 3, actually.
Oh, spoilers.
Do you remember, and I think we did talk about this at the time, do you remember Basilius Foe took the form
He's my favorite person.
of a man named Xanthus?
Xanthus? Yeah. Yeah.
He would go on to found the Inquisition and start the Xanthium belief.
Was he Basilius Foe?
We believe so.
Huh,
It's,
okay.
if only because the personality of Xanthus
Is wildly
does
different.
not match the kind of person who would start Xanthanism.
What is Xanthanism?
Xanthanism is the belief that you can use chaos to defeat chaos.
That sounds very much like Basilius Foe.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It is a super dangerous philosophical belief, incredibly radical,
I mean,
and and it has shown.
I'm not saying I disagree.
It's shown mixed effects. There's actually a great story, just a side tangent, in which an Ordo Xenos Inquisitor, obsessed with wiping out orcs, basically develops a Nurgle plague to infect orc spores.
Don't just be letting Nurgle loose.
It works for a time until it opens a Nurgle warp gate.
Yep.
That was bad. Yeah. So that's the Xanthites. And then even a step further than the Xanthites are the Oblationists, who believe that they personally have to be sacrificed to chaos, basically created as the weapon of chaos. Like it is their
That sounds wrong.
it is their job to give up their souls for the betterment of humanity. So
Not
the
really
rest
sure
of
how they
humanity
got
can
there, but that's not great.
Yeah.
So you're not allowed to be one of those.
No.
Other Inquisitors will
No.
kill you.
Oh, well, Oblationists are like the closest you can get
To being an actual chaos
to be an
worshiper.
actual heretic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's so many other radical ones that have been
Okay.
detailed. The Ocularians, I'm forgetting a bunch of them now.
Ocularian.
The Horesians,
Okay.
who basically believe that Horus was a part of the emperor himself, and that they're basically trying to resurrect Horus.
I don't recommend that.
Yeah.
But okay. I would not recommend that. But
So-
they're not wrong in the first half.
Right.
Kind of.
So within the community, people think of Ordos as the most important separator of
Right.
Inquisitors.
But it's
Philosophy,
really philosophy.
is a much more important one within universe.
Okay. That's interesting.
So with that out of the way, I want to just quickly touch on another element of the Inquisition that gets brought up a lot.
Okay.
And its lore has changed a bit, and I think people still get confused by this.
Okay.
It's a bit of a hot take, and this is on chamber militants.
You have a hot take. Oh, I know
do,
the
yes.
chamber militants.
Yeah? Tell us about the chamber militants.
I like how I said I know with full confidence, and now I think I got one. The Grey Knights,
Okay. Yep.
the Sisters of Battle,
Yep. I know you can do it.
the dudes who pop up and disappear and are ghosts.
That's Legion of the Damned, but they do kind of look like them. You know, I can kind of see that.
The Death Watch.
The Death Watch.
Ah,
Very good.
ha-ha.
Good job. So the term chamber militant.
Okay.
When chamber militant was first developed in the lore, it was basically seen as the military branch
Okay.
of the three ordos.
Okay. Each one gets
each,
one.
Each one gets one. Since then, because at the time, your army would basically be like a Sisters of Battle army led by an Inquisitor.
Okay.
A Death Watch force led by an Inquisitor. Grey
Okay.
Knights led by an Inquisitor.
But I feel like in modern
Go ahead.
40K, they're loose. Like they're
Exactly.
I've never seen an Inquisitor. I mean, I have seen Inquisitors,
have.
but it's not usually an Inquisitor and a detachment of Sisters of Battle.
Right. Well,
Sometimes, but like
it does happen occasionally.
Yeah.
The point is, newer lore has dropped the term chamber militant. I went back, I checked every single codex that I could find. The term chamber militant does not exist in anything past 6th edition.
Oh. Why?
Because they wanted to separate them. Because the idea of chamber militant is when an Inquisitor says jump, they ask how high
Okay.
under chamber militant.
Okay.
And it's not like that anymore. Now, It's completely separate organizations
who might cooperate.
Okay. And often do. Okay. Now, for those of you who know a little bit more, they'll say, but the Death Watch have the Inquisitorial seal on their armor. It is not because they are subservient to the Inquisition. It is because of a close relationship. Check the 9th and 10th editions of Codex Death Watch. They have changed that lore. The Chamber militants don't really exist. All three are independent entities from the Inquisition, which the Inquisition can request, and it's not even limited by Ordo. So it used to be like, oh, well, only Ordo Xenos Inquisitors would know how to call the Death Watch. Only, Ordo Malleus would know how to call the Grey Knights. Not necessarily true anymore.
Okay. So you can call whichever one you want.
If you still need to know how, but that information isn't like hard restricted to Ordo. Yeah. There's a lot more nebulousness and sort of granularity to all of it now. So, with those sort of major features out of the way, I want to jump into the Ordo Minoris.
I can only name one of those. I think. Kronos, like the time.
Ordo Kronos is an Ordo Minoris. Good job.
Yeah, I think that's the only one I got.
So Ordo Kronos, so we can start with that one. Is basically the Inquisitors who are focused on time travel, time anomalies, anything having to do with issues relating to the timeline.
So like Doctor Who.
A little bit, yes. There's an old story about a blue box being found within 40K, and it predates the Ordo Kronos by many years, but people still thought
might be a TARDIS,
right? But even just basic things like warp travel. How much time do you gain and lose as part of warp travel? The Legion of the Damned technically might be time travel, and there's a very interesting story of an Inquisitor who of the Ordo Kronos who captures a Legion of the Damned.
That's interesting. I'd like to read that.
Using like a time stasis.
I feel like maybe I know them because they got mentioned in Dawn of Fire, like when Guilliman was trying to make a timeline of all the things that happened.
Really? Oh, I don't recall that.
I feel like I think so. I feel like that's the only reason I would know that. But the answer was they were wrong, and his timeline was more accurate, obviously. That would be his conclusion.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. The most famous one. So since the opening of the Great Rift, the Ordo Kronos has been going through something called the Chronos Strife, which is a secret underground war within the department to figure out what the date is.
I don't know what the date is either.
And there are dozens of factions.
No one knows. Yeah. Got it. We don't know what date
No one knows. Gilman says we're off by about 1,000 years, which is why, despite the last year being 999 M41, we're 1,000 years back. It's now the start of the 41st millennium again.
I feel like I didn't know that, but okay.
Well, that's why you will never see a printed M42 anywhere. Even though, technically, anything post the fall of Cadia should be M42.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that's how I know that it came up in Dawn of Fire when he was like bitching about trying to make the timeline correct.
Right.
Along with maps.
So that's Ordo Kronos.
Okay.
The next sort of major Ordo Minoris is the Order Machinum. Machinum, yes.
Like machine.
Like machine. Okay. Most people immediately think, oh, they're the inquisitorial agency that watches over the Adeptus Mechanicus. No.
I don't think you're allowed to do that.
That is correct. The Inquisition does not have the authority to watch over the machine cult. The Adeptus Mechanicus and the machine cult technically not being the same thing, but that's a whole other story.
Okay.
What the Ordo Machinum do is they actually check when new STC technology is discovered. And it's going to be like brought up to production and like disseminated to the rest of the Imperium.
Okay.
They check to make sure that it's actually safe.
Okay.
They're the ones who are like the final decision on, okay, this is going out to the rest of the Imperium.
OSHA.
Factories are going to produce this. I don't know if I'd go with OSHA because it is still discovered technology.
Okay.
It's like, oh, well, this lasgun has a mind interface element to it. Is that a Xenos tech involved in it?
Kind of OSHA, but like broad.
So that's the Ordo Machinum.
Okay.
Next on my list is the Ordo Sicarius.
Of assassins?
Yes.
Only because I'm good at Latin, not because I have ever
Very
heard
good.
of them. Yeah.
The Ordo Sicarius watches over the Officio Assassinorum. Now, they were created after you did not read, I'm forgetting the name of it, The Beast Arises.
I did not read that, no.
Slight spoiler to it, the head of the Assassinorum at the time takes over the entire High Lords and rules the Imperium for about a century.
Interesting.
It goes badly.
It sounds like it would go badly.
Yes. He is a fascinating character, though.
Okay.
We may or may not get to that at some point.
I'd read
Anyway, in the wake of that, the Ordo Sicarius is formed.
Okay.
And they have some interesting history to them.
Okay.
Because normally, when Officio Assassinorum agent has to be sent out to assassinate someone, the old lore was, well, all the High Lords have to sign off on it. Turns out the High Lords are really busy and they can't sign off on every single assassination.
Fair.
So often, it's an Inquisitor of the Ordo Sicarius that's doing the sign off for them in their name.
Interesting. Okay.
That's one element of them.
Okay.
The other element is in watching over the Assassinorium and having to sort of learn everything that the Assassinorum does, they're like,
we could do this.
We can do this.
That's what I would think, yeah.
So Ordo Sicarius agents tend to be very similar to what you'd normally see in Temple Assassins, or like knockoff versions of it.
But they're like decent assassins. Okay.
Excuse me, just drinking my juice for YouTube. The next are a pair, and I really like these pair. These are classic 40K satire.
Okay.
That's the Ordo Originatus and the Ordo Redactus.
Redactus is straightforward.
Okay.
Whose origins for Originatus is my question.
The Inquisitions. Well, and really the whole history of the Imperium.
Okay.
The Ordo Originatus is dedicated to searching through the Imperium's history to try to find any lost knowledge that might help the current day.
Okay.
And the Ordo Redactus is to constantly go through and get rid of any information that might be used by our enemies. You know, as
which is
possible
most
weaknesses.
Information.
There tends to be a very scorched earth policy when it comes to information in the Imperium. So as you can see, they don't like each other.
I could imagine they would not be friends.
No. So that's just a fun bit.
Okay.
We then have the Ordo, I believe it's Sepulturum.
Like sepulture, like of a church, or like of a burying.
Possibly.
Sepulche.
ULT.
Sepulture with a T. It's weird. What is it?
So they are focused on plague zombies and other physical or warp-based pathogens or like viruses.
Sepulture. Okay, I'll have to figure out what that is in Latin.
Yeah. So
I was thinking sepulcher like of a funerary design, but you are saying of a biological origin.
What? Well, because they also deal with things like the plague of unbelief.
Okay.
Which technically was a kind of meme virus.
Okay.
Anything that would spread that would lead to zombification, that would lead to
zombies exclusively.
Well, pandemic type events.
Okay.
War like galaxy spanning pandemic type events.
Sepulture with a T. Okay. Cool.
So they're a pretty interesting one. We then have a couple of minor ones. So in the old Codex Inquisitors, they listed a bunch of Ordo Minoris, and they left out all sorts of little bits of information, just like a grid of what do they watch over, how many members are there, when were they founded. A whole bunch of stuff is just redacted from that.
Okay.
We've got the Ordo Aegis.
Of like the Aegis around Terra, or of generally what is the Aegis of the Inquisition?
It's the Aegis of the Cadian Gate. So it's the Aegis around the Eye of Terror.
Okay.
Fun fact, since that was written, they're out of a job.
Yes.
So Cadian Gate no longer exists.
Doesn't need an Aegis.
Yeah. So they've got a problem. The Ordo Custodum.
Of the Custodes?
Not what you'd think.
No?
So the Ordo Custodum actually watches over the safety of Terra specifically.
Okay.
And I'm talking about like if a warp storm were to pass over Terra, if an orc wog were to be approaching it. Like, they obviously would work very closely with the Adeptus Custodes, but they are all about protecting Terra itself.
Okay. I've never heard of that one.
There is the Ordo Militarum. Very simple.
Of the Astra Militarum.
They watch over technically all branches of the military.
Okay.
So Imperial Guard, Imperial Navy,
Okay.
Tempestus Scions.
Okay.
Technically, they overlap with the next one, which is the Ordo Astartes. There's only
watch
about,
over Space Marines.
well, there's only about 50 members in that one.
Okay. It's not a lot.
But they're very old.
Okay.
The Ordo Astartes was founded in M32.
Okay.
I want to get back to them because I have a section at the end that I want to talk about my theories. Basically, we're no longer in canon lore.
Okay.
We're just in some of my ideas for all of these.
It's gonna get wild.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Okay.
We then have the Ordo Sanctorum. Ordo Sanctorum watches over
The palace?
the Adeptus Ministorum, the church,
Okay.
essentially. Some of these, as we say them, there is obvious overlap and redundancy with groups like the Sisters of Battle or the Administratum or other sort of institutions. It's the Imperium. We would expect
A ton of redundancy.
Yeah.
It's inefficient.
Speaking of inefficiency, the Ordo Barbarus.
Nothing.
So the Ordo Barbarus watches over pre-industrial worlds. It's basically the idea that those that have not achieved a certain technological level yet are most at risk of falling to chaos.
So it's like the Chaos Prime Directive.
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Like no introducing things that might leave a hole to chaos into civilizations that aren't ready for that thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
What else have we got on this list?
You got a long list.
Oh, this is my favorite topic. I love talking about this. Okay, now we've got the really weird ones.
Okay.
We've got the Ordo Desolatus.
I know what that means, but I don't know what it means for an Inquisitor.
Any ideas?
Desolate. Like Tomb World, maybe.
Okay. The Ordo Desolatus has one member.
What?
And we have no idea what they do.
That's very, very, very 40K. What do you mean there's one member and we don't know what they do?
Yep.
Okay.
And even less than that, the Ordo Thanatos.
Has no members?
We don't know anything about them except their name.
Weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, given your Latin, Ordo
Like
Thanatos,
death.
we would think death.
Okay.
Sure. Okay. Now we're getting into the theories a little bit.
Maybe it's like, missing legions. Or deaths of super important imperial citizens.
Okay.
That for which the actual events may or may not be known and need to be protected.
Interesting. Okay. But one member? Or do you mean the Ordo Thanatos?
I meant Thanatos. Desolatus, I have no idea. Right. I don't know what one dude is doing.
Except then, we also have the Ordo Necros.
Which also sounds like death.
It does.
Does it have more than one member?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it has about, I think, was it 5 or 50? I don't remember, but it's quite small.
Okay.
It's definitely under 100.
Okay.
This is my theory for the Ordo Necros, because we don't actually know what they do. I believe they protect the Imperium from the death of the Emperor specifically.
Huh.
The idea that you must protect the Imperium of all costs. But if the Emperor were to die, what exactly will happen? What will happen in the warp? What will happen to Terra? What will happen to the rest of the Imperium?
Okay. That's a tough job.
Yes.
I don't know what you do.
It seems like a very theoretical one also.
Yeah.
Because I also believe they focus on what are all the possible things that could kill the Emperor. Could you starve him to death? Could you just stab him? Could you
I'm assuming he's not eating.
Well, he's eating souls.
Yeah, okay. But you don't starve to death of soul. I mean, I guess you
do
could
if
starve
you're
to...
not feeding them.
I didn't think you meant souls. I thought you meant food. And I was like, is someone feeding the Emperor on the throne?
There might be some other functionalities to the Golden Throne.
I mean, it probably has.
So in the lore, we do know, this is not directly related to the Ordo Necros, but there was a conspiracy that involved very slowly weaning the number of psychers that were getting sent to the Emperor. The Custodes put a stop to it.
So slightly starving the Emperor.
But like trying to lower it over time.
Okay. Interesting.
So the Ordo Necros focused on what happens when the Emperor dies, what can kill the Emperor, everything related to the death of the Emperor. Now, why do I think that? Because of the next Ordo.
Okay.
And that's the Ordo Vigilis.
Do they watch the Emperor?
They watch the Ordo Necros.
Why?
We don't know, but that is their function.
See, then that makes me think maybe the Ordo Necros are just like necromancers. They're just bringing people back from the dead.
You think?
Yeah, because that would need a whole Ordo to watch them.
I suppose that is sort of the typical answer. I wanted a little bit more of an interesting one. So that's why I like the Ordo Necros as the death of the Emperor, because in my mind, the Ordo Vigilis makes sure that anything the Ordo Necros learns, they never ever put it to use.
That's fair. But why would we think they would be trying to kill the Emperor?
Doesn't matter if they're trying to kill the Emperor.
Oh, but they could leak that information. People
could
know it.
We found all of these things that are capable of killing the Emperor. To which everyone else was like, you what? No.
Don't talk about that.
Right.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, fair.
I've got one last major theory before we wrap up. That pretty much covers most of the Ordo Minoris. There's a few others that I missed. The Ordo Scriptorum deals with like communiques and functionalities. They're not very good at their job, but they
no one in the
exist.
Imperium who does anything with paper is good at their job.
True. Yes. Although
except everyone who works for Gilliman, because he vets you for being good at your job.
Yeah. This is all pre Great Rift,
Okay.
pre Fall of Cadia lore, by the way. And this last one is related to the Ordo Astartes.
Okay.
This is my theory. I believe the Ordo Astartes used to be a major Ordo. That when it was founded, it was one of the founding members. Now remember, Ordo Hereticus was not founded until M36. Until after the Reign of Blood, after Gogi Van Dyer. There was just Xenos and Malleus, technically.
So you think it was Xenos, Malleus, Astartes?
I think it was Astartes at first, because people remembered the Horus Heresy. And as Space Marine sort of started to build back up in the public eye again, the Ordo Astartes kind of lost favor in that.
Okay.
I also believe, so there's a chapter of Space Marines called the Red Hunters. Familiar with them? Okay. So the Red Hunters, unlike the Chamber Militants or like the other sort of dedicated inquisitorial chapters you'd think of, the Red Hunters can be called on by any inquisitor.
Okay. And
their icon is just a skull with the actual inquisitorial seal on it.
Okay.
The Death Watch one is not the real seal, just for reference. I think the Red Hunters used to be the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Astartes.
I see.
But as they lost influence, they had to basically share it with everyone else.
I see. Interesting.
That they would be the group that they observe chapters, and they would petition groups like the Pentarchy of Blood. So the Pentarchy of Blood was a group of 5 extremely vicious chapters from the early days, who basically had to put down 12 other chapters during something called the War of the False Primarch.
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, this is some...
Post-heresy.
Post-heresy.
Pre-now.
Pre-now. M32, I believe.
Okay.
Let me just get the list of the...
I didn't realize there was ever a campaign in which we were, like, fully putting the kibosh on chapters of Space Marines.
Oh, yes. The Minotaurs. The Minotaurs do it all the time.
I didn't know that.
And also chapters that fall to chaos. They're put down all the time.
Okay.
So the Pentarchy of Blood, gathering of 5 chapters, convened by the High Lords in M33 during the War of the False Primarch. I'm sorry, my numbers were off. 11 other chapters.
Okay.
Those chapters are the Carcharodons.
The Space Sharks.
Space Sharks. The Charnel Guard.
Don't know them. I'm going to say Blood Angels.
Blood Angels, yes. You remember Zephon?
Yeah.
He becomes their first chapter master.
Oh. Did Zephon get killed? Or do they get put down after? Oh, this is the Pentarchy.
This is the Pentarchy.
I thought this was the chapters who
11.
got put down. Yes.
We don't know who the 11 are.
Redacted.
Yeah, redacted. The Death Eagles.
That's a terrible name.
They're a Raven Guard chapter that might actually be Emperor's children. So they're an interesting one.
Okay.
The Flesh Eaters.
Blood Angels.
Yes, worse than the Flesh Terrors.
Okay.
And the Red Talons.
Not Blood Angels?
No, the Red Talons are an Iron Hand successor.
Okay.
Do you remember Autek Moore?
I remember that name, but that's it.
Okay, so Autek Moore, famous Iron Hand, super vicious, dropped a moon on a planet.
Rude.
Yeah.
But they were acting up. You don't just drop a moon on a planet that doesn't deserve it.
It was a World Eater recruiting world.
Okay. They deserve that moon.
Yeah. Yeah, Red Talons are not a group to mess with.
Okay.
So these 5 together wiped out 11 others.
That's intense.
Right. So I believe groups like the Pentarchy of Blood are the ones that the Ordo Astartes used to deal with more frequently.
Got it.
What else I got on my notes?
These are exhaustive notes. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to this because they write it in just the right way.
To leave little holes.
To leave holes. Oh, another short theory. I believe the Ordo Sanctorum, the Ordo Barbarus, are Ordo Hereticus offshoots.
Okay.
That basically, because a lot of these do overlap with Ordo Hereticus.
Okay.
Militarum 2, technically their founding date is before
Hereticus.
So that one doesn't work out.
Okay.
But it definitely sounds like it would have been.
It does, yeah.
So Sanctorum, Barbarus, and a few others, I think, are Ordo Hereticus.
Okay.
Offshoots, especially because Ordo Hereticus is the largest Ordo.
Okay. Thus, they would have more.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah. That's my knowledge on the Ordo Minoris of the Inquisition.
Well, now I feel like we got to read a book about an Inquisitor.
So you never read the Death Watch novels by Steve
not.
Parker.
No.
So we might pop that one in.
Okay, we can put that on the
pretty
list.
solid book.
Okay.
Death Watch in general is a fun read.
Okay. I would be down.
All sorts of interactions between chapters, inquisitorial, like just sort of watching things is good.
Okay.
What do you guys think? What's your favorite piece of little inquisitorial lore? Any other major bits that I missed out on?
Yeah, put that in the comments. Let us know.
Yeah. What did you like?
I think I like the Ordo Thanos, and I like the one that you think watches the Emperor. Although I'm not sure I think that's what they do.
The Ordo Thanatos and the Ordo Necros?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's interesting.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm pro Inquisitor.
You're pro Inquisitor.
Pro Inquisitor.
Even the radical ones?
I mean, maybe not.
Even the mono-dominant ones?
Maybe not sacrifice your personal soul to chaos. I'm not down with that. But,
Okay.
okay. All right.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll be back next time. What are we back next time with?
We'll have a next book.
We haven't picked a next book yet.
I think we're doing Plague War.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Yep. Second Dark Imperium book.
Okay.
Right.
See you guys then.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.